A good day, familia. This is Ray Collazo, and you're watching and listening to Bomba Live, the talk show you've been waiting for your entire life. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful spring day. I'm talking to you very, very early in the morning. What day is it today? It's very early in the morning on Thursday, May 11th, in the wee hours before I take my kids to school. But I felt compelled to share a little bit with you later on in the day, later on in the week. This week, we're actually going to be releasing part 2 of my exclusive interview with legendary Philly hip hop artist MC Planetary from the Gru's Outer Space Army of the Pharaohs and the supergroup Army of the Pharaohs. Part 2 of our incredible interview where he talks about the comeback, him making his first solo album after being 20 years in the game. And this being a very special album because he's doing it with his 3 sons, one of which Element produced this incredible incredible opus that's coming out on May 12th on all music audio platforms. On this episode of Bomba Live, the talk show you've been waiting for your whole life, later on the show, I'm going to really make myself very vulnerable because I'm talking about something that triggers me, that really speaks to the core of who I am, especially from my childhood. And of course, I'm talking about my Philadelphia 76ers that hours from now could make history and make little Ray very happy. In all seriousness, we'll talk also later in the show. We're going to hear from journalist Bianca Graulau about her analysis of Puerto Rico Governor Pedro Pierluisi's comments, basically calling out us, Puerto Rican activists that actually want access to our islands, coastline and beaches, and actually are very concerned about the economic policies that have been passed that basically provide people that have no concern for Puerto Rico, no care for our community, to have tax incentives to basically gobble up valuable coastline and valuable land that is being increasingly harder to access for the native Puerto Rican people. So you get some analysis on that. And we'll get an immigration update. A lot going on that people need to be aware of and understand what's happening, what's not happening on our southern border. But I wanted to, talk about these folks first. This is just the latest set of victims in this crisis that we have in our country, with this very toxic stew of gun culture, mental health problems, isolation, and just really shitty policy that is allowing for people like these folks that just went to a mall on a sunny day to, buy some items and spend some time with family who are no longer with us. The Cho family is incredible, especially tragic in that basically the entire family, except for one 6-year-old boy, was lost. He's an orphan now, that young man. And 8 killed, 7 injured, including the gunman. We're going to have another episode with an interview with Arturo Dominguez, the Latino journalist, to talk about the dynamics of that assailant. But the thing that I'm trying to reflect on, because we're dealing with this today, and I struggle with, like, what do I tell y'all that's any new? What are the reflections when we almost are being desensitized to it? And what I keep going back to is leadership, the word leadership. And that's what's on my mind as we have this conversation. So we know that the main culprits, the villains in this story, the primary villains in this story, besides, well, really the gun industry is the biggest villain, closely followed by the Republican Party. The Republican Party at this point is not only in the pocket of the gun lobby and the NRA, but even it's really much worse than that, because it's one thing to be bought off, but it's another thing to be a terrorist organization masquerading as a political party that is inculcated with a gun cult. And that's really, it's much deeper than just being sold out. When you feel the need to have your children in their Christmas clothes, take pictures, for like what's more sacred than your Christmas card with your family? What's supposed to be most delicate and loving and family oriented. And when you feel the need para poner, like a freaking machine gun in your little daughter's hands for that picture, that's a sickness. And this cult is really what's blocking, for the most part. There's Democrats that have been complicit as well, particularly in the last, recent history. We had, we there was a window and in the beginning of the Obama administration, we could have banned AR-15s and we didn't. Democrats. And so we're all there's many bloody hands, but primarily it's Republicans from the top down. But the political parties are not the only people that can impact change. And we've seen from history, from activism, and all kinds of different sectors from our society have levers to put pressure to make change. And we're seeing leadership. So where's the leadership? So we're seeing leadership. Unfortunately, the people showing the most leadership are the people that need our most support are the victims and their families. So again and again, Parkland, Sandy Hook, of all day, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, the victims and their families, their loved ones, their networks are creating incredible movements that are impacting change. And we've even seen it as challenging as the political environment is. The bipartisan bill, which was, a small step, but a step indeed last year on the federal level. We've had bills in places like Florida, even though we're going backwards in Florida now, but in another government bodies that have moved the ball some. But outside of that, where's the leadership? And I think about all the sectors that we need to be hearing from right now to show leadership. The first one I think about is law enforcement. They're the ones on the front lines. They're the ones that are literally the most endangered by being outgunned in the streets by people that have no business having firearms, much less military style weaponry and tactical gear. So why isn't law enforcement in unison on a national level being louder about this? Is it because they're connected to the gun lobby too? Is it that the Republicans are favorable with them with union contract negotiations? Is it that they're also kind of part of this white supremacist terrorist organization called the Republican Party? Why isn't law enforcement ringing the alarm much louder? I wonder. And that's a real shame because it'd be really helpful if they stepped up right now and showed us some leadership in this area. Corporate America, all of us outside of Amazon and Postmates, I guess, and social media platforms, all of us being scared to leave our houses is not good for almost any other business. So we're not going to have malls anymore. We're not going to have concerts anymore. We're not going to ever feel comfortable. We're going to get to the point we don't ever feel comfortable being around a group of people ever again. So if corporate America wants a real economy here where people move around and it's not just, we're all living in our own individual prisons, then corporate America needs to get a little louder about this, a lot louder. It puts some real pressure and threaten to not give any money to any of these politicians that are supporting this. And I know there's probably you can cite a few examples, but it ain't enough. And corporate America needs to step it up on this because, even if you don't care about children and your families and all that, I mean, we want to have a functioning society the way we're going. The legal community, every movement and thinking about civil rights movement and, so many other movements we've had in our country, the legal wing of it has always been the hammer, oftentimes. And so I know we have lawsuits, but we need the legal community to just sue the shit out of all these people constantly. And, I mean, we've seen examples. Fox just took a big hit and they're not out of business, but ain't the same business anymore. And so we need the legal community to really to couch what is going on here, which is, there is malice intent, there's bad actors in our politics and in the corporate world of guns and weaponry, and we need to sue the hell out of these people and put some companies out of business. And I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not saying it's easy, but we didn't get desegregation in our schools, desegregation, voting rights. We didn't get that I mean, marches and organizing was a humongous part of it. But we wouldn't get that without the legal arm constantly flooding the courts with these lawsuits. So we need the legal community to step it up. And again, this is the last one I will mention is, and I think oftentimes, particularly in the black community, people point to this sector too much. It's not fair for them to take the lead on a lot of these things. And they didn't sign up to be activists. But our celebrity class needs to step it up here. Across the board. There's been moments in our history that all of you remember where the celebrity class forced the country to stop what they were doing to really to take a look at an issue. Live Aid. We Are the World. This was hunger in Africa that starting in England, I forget the gentleman's name, but there was I'll remember it later. But starting with artists in England, then all the biggest American pop artists did this incredible song, "We Are the World," and then we all stopped and had this humongous concert series, Live Aid, and we all stopped as a global society and paused to focus our collective attention on addressing the issue of starvation in Africa. 9/11. There were moments where we all paused and stopped as a collective, and the celebrity class led a lot of that. Katrina, where Kanye West, remember him, said the famous "Bush don't care about black people." But that was a moment in time when the celebrity class took leadership to say, across ideology, across race, across our different sectors within the entertainment industry, we're all going to stop and say enough is enough. And you don't even have to say, even if you're, because of politics and your own ideology and your market, you don't want to say congressperson ban AR-15s. Why don't we just get people together to say to our people, our young people that feel isolated, shooting someone is not the answer. Killing people is not the answer. Waving guns in people's faces to carjack when you think it's funny, you saw that TikTok challenge, is not cool. That would be really helpful. That'd be really helpful right now. And again, it's easy for me to point fingers to celebrities and future famous people. And so ultimately, I go back to what I say. If you get nothing out of this show, family, nothing. If you get one thing, is that it starts with us. There's a whole world of followers. There's a whole world of us. A whole world of y'all. Most people are followers. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it's been. So my question to you is, when are you going to lead? And I'm not saying you have to run for office. I'm not saying you have to have my political ideology. I'm not saying you've got to do it my way. But we all got to do something. Whether it's in church, whether it's, I got that cousin that he's been going through it. Let me go pick him up, grab him, and go get a cup of coffee with him. Go get a beer with him and make sure his head is in the right place. Why don't you text your homie you ain't talked to in a while? Sees that he's been going through it. Just try to save one person, especially these disaffected men, and young people that are isolated, that are seeing all this garbage on social media and don't see an answer and don't see a way for them to live a happy life. Starts with us, family. When we come back, we're going to take a break. And I'm really excited because, again, let me tell you, my interview stuff, fam, with MC Planetary from the group Out of Space and the hip hop super group Army of the Pharaohs has been incredible. Part 1 is out. I'm releasing part 2 later today, or maybe first thing in the morning, but very soon. And his album comes out on May 12th. Y'all got to check it out. So what I want to do right now is play a couple clips from part 1 of this incredible interview, talking about how he started, how this Puerto Rican kid from Philadelphia in the late 80s, early 90s, as a very young man, not only started in hip hop and created a career that includes now 5 full-length feature albums and touring and fans all over the world, but also but also involves his family, but also as a young guy was involved in like Philadelphia hip hop history. It's incredible stuff. So let's watch a few clips from that interview. I encourage people to subscribe and download. Go to Bomba Live's YouTube page. Follow Bomba Live on social media, but the YouTube, if you go to Bomba Live's YouTube page, you'll find this part one of this incredible 3-part interview with Mario Collazo, aka NC Planetary. When we come back, we'll give you an update on what's going on with immigration here on Bomba Live, the talk show you've been waiting for your entire life. So you always knew you had an eye for talent.
Yeah.
And how did that impact just you as a person to be around that kind of artistic energy?
It became my life. I mean, you know, it just wasn't any was. Once I got to that world, I never left. I'm still there. You know, like everything I thought I was supposed to do, I didn't do none of it. You know, like I was like, do I do this? Do I go to school? I just wanted to, you know, I just want to be a creative. I don't want to really.
You literally sat me down and said, Ray, I got to sit down and tell you something. I thought it was like a problem. You were like, I have discovered a group that's going to revolutionize hip hop. They are a band.
Yeah.
And they're called the Square Roots. This is before Roots.
Yeah, they were the Square
Roots. They were the Square Roots, he said. And the MC's sick. They got a drummer, crazy hair. They go to Kappa.
Yeah.
They're going to change the game. So we're talking about in high school, this is not just Philly being a great influence, music hub, period. Welcome back to Bomba Live, the talk show you've been waiting for your entire life. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, MC Planetary. Again, check out his new album, Project Pluto, which is going to be on all audio music platforms tomorrow, Friday, May 12th, as well as check out his the part 2 of a special exclusive 3-part interview series that I did with MC Planetary. You're only going to see exclusively here on Bomba Live. You got to check out the Bomba Live YouTube channel for those incredible nuggets of information. If you love hip hop history, if you love just talking to a creative about their creative process, what made him come back after many years of not being as active and doing it with his family. I mean, could you imagine a hip hop artist that grew up with the Roots, Jill Scott, Eve, and created incredible music in that era, 20 years plus later, producing a full-length feature album, which is fire. I haven't advanced copy with his 3 sons. It's just beautiful, and it's an incredible story, so we have to support MC Planetary. So I wanted to give people a brief immigration update because there's a lot going on, and we need people to understand kind of what's happening. So you may have seen Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Ali Mayorkas speak earlier yesterday, kind of giving people an update about what the administration is going to do as it relates to the southern border and the mass migration that has been taking place and kind of building up over the last year or so. And the numbers are kind of historically large. There's no question about that, and we have to be honest about that. And obviously, you know, this is something we have to address in a very serious way. So, Secretary Mayorkas, and it's being, some would argue, exacerbated because Title 42, which was a rule that the Trump administration put in place under the guise of COVID, safety. Even though 1 million people died of COVID under Trump, basically blocking people to apply for asylum, which is a human right. So, something that had to go away, particularly since the COVID emergency was lifted in our country. And so what was interesting, so Secretary Mayorkas laid out kind of a series of steps the administration is going to do. I encourage people to check out his full press conference that's online, but more border personnel to deal with asylum claims and just kind of that process. There's, we're not too happy about the fact that those, including some members of the U.S. military, to deal with processing issues, regional processing centers. So if you're in Colombia, instead of going to the United States to apply for asylum, you would go to a local American processing center and do so in your native country, and a digital campaign on people's phones and social media in Central America discouraging people to come. And so, this is a very complicated issue because, nobody wants, there certainly are activists that feel this way around the country, but there's no mainstream there was no, even in the more progressive Latino and immigrant activist circles, there was no call for an open border policy, unfettered access to our borders. Now, I think frankly, sometimes that would be better than some of the solutions that the right wingers propose. Frankly, it wouldn't be the worst thing that would happen, to be honest with you. But nevertheless, that's for lots of reasons, that's not that's not something that we're advocating for at all. But we have to first ground this problem, this challenge, on what it is, which is a humanitarian crisis. This is not a attack on our country. This isn't a terrorist attack. This isn't this is not a criminal exercise. This is a humanitarian problem. And so in the same way that we sentimos mucho for the people of Ukraine, or people that are dealing with famines, or other people that we have a whole lot of sympathy for, we need to have sympathy for these people, and a lot of care. And it's so, just think about the racial undertone of this whole thing. They try to scare people and talk about a crisis just by showing groups of people walking, like, you know as if they're in a parade almost. So, I mean, groups of people walking is not threatening in by its nature, but if you couch it and show brown people doing it, and brown and black immigrants doing it, that are, by the way, very poor and struggling, they're literally walking across Latin America to get here. That's some sorts of, like, we're supposed to be scared of that. So the you have to challenge, as you're seeing the news coverage of this whole situation, by the premise of it. So this is a humanitarian crisis. So we have to address it that way. The other thing is, they have to acknowledge the reason we're having this, part of the reason we're having this influx. There's lots of reasons. But the reality is that this is about this is happening because of 30 years of neglect around the issue. And so, because both parties have played politics with this issue, because we don't have comprehensive immigration reform, which activists have been saying we needed to have for decades, because of climate change, which we're not addressing, which impacts the poorest people first, especially in Central America and the Caribbean. I mean, Puerto Ricans that came after Hurricane Maria, that were climate change refugees. In the same way, a lot of these people from Central America, who literally, it's so dry now they can't grow crops, have to find somewhere else to work. So we haven't addressed climate change the way we should have. We haven't addressed immigration reform, and finally, we haven't addressed Latin America. I mean, when you ignore Latin America for you know, when you ignore Latin America for decades, maybe there becomes untenable situations in these countries. And so, Central America, which there's a whole other set of conversations around why these particular countries in Central America, the Central American Triangle, because that's where the bulk of a lot of the immigration is coming from, and some of these uh, political countries like Venezuela and Cuba that have political turmoil, not really coming from Mexico like that. I mean, why are these countries in this place in the first place? Maybe if we had cultivated a relationship with supported these countries over the years, we wouldn't have this problem. I have a good friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, that lived in Dubai during the Arab Spring. And when all that was going down, remember all that, Libya and all that, remember the Arab Spring, protests everywhere by trying to have democracy and freer countries, in Egypt and all that stuff. You know what they did in the United Arab Emirates? They sent everyone a nice check. They said, "We just want we cool. Everything cool here. We don't need democracy. We don't, but you cool. Look, you got money here. Here's a check. You need 10,000, here's 15,000, you got it." So, that's an example when you don't want things to be chaotic, maybe let's take care of people first. So, I call on the administration to work with our activists and folks, and really understand what's going on, because the communities on the southern border it is a strain on the resources, and it's hard. It's hard, and you don't, on some level, you don't want to, you feel for these people, but you also want to see them be processed in a way that's reasonable, and where you don't have people lying around the street and walk around your neighborhood, don't even know where they're at. So it's all those things are understandable, and the bottom line is that if we had a system in place that made sense, you could have you could do a asylum case in a month or two and not have people wait 3-4 years. And that's where that people staying in the country for extended periods while these processes play out is what's annoying a lot of people. So more to come on that. We're going to stay very diligent on it. This is actually I do a fair amount of work on these topics, but I'm certainly not the expert. So we want to bring people onto the show that can really speak to these issues and give you all accurate information about what's happening, so you can make your own informed decisions, because it's not easy. And you hear a lot of rhetoric, and quite honestly, most people in the mainstream media have very little understanding of the issue. Before we take a break, I wanted to, and then you're gonna hear me opine about my 76ers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 76ers. I wanted us to just mention again. I mentioned earlier the governor, Puerto Rico Governor Pedro Pierluisi actually regañó nosotros, the activists that actually are pushing back on the fact that outsiders are coming to our island because of lucrative tax breaks that are encouraging people to come to our island, have no connection to our island, and basically gobble up prime real estate on our island, make it more difficult for us Puerto Ricans that live there to access public beaches because there's no such thing as a private beach in Puerto Rico. And instead of using those breaks, you use incentivizing Puerto Ricans on the island to grow businesses and build up the economy of the island. They're basically giving away incredible tax incentives to people that don't care about us. So we're pushing back on that. And I'm in my way as a diaspora Puerto Rican, I push back on that and I support the island leadership on the island that's doing that. And the governor regañó nosotros and is calling us xenophobic and calling us racist. Can you believe that? You know how many half white family members I got in Puerto Rico? They're Puerto Rican and they care about their fellow man and not trying to get over on people. Nevertheless, the celebrated Puerto Rican journalist Bianca Graulau did a recent social media post about it, gives you context of his comments. So I wanted to play that because she's in a much better position than me to kind of explain clearly the what the governor did not explain in his comments recently. You're also going to hear from uh, Wilmar Vasquez, who's an activist on the island, and her perspective on this issue. And then we come back, once we hear from these incredible Puerto Rican women, Bianca and Wilmar, we'll come back and talk about what's on the line tonight for my Philadelphia 76ers.
Governor said that criticizing outside investors coming to Puerto Rico to buy property is racist and xenophobic. Here's what he didn't say. He did not mention that his party created a law that gives outside investors an advantage over locals. The governor was part of the administration that signed into law a tax break that gives 0% capital gains tax to people moving to Puerto Rico. But if you have been continuously living here, it does not apply to you. He also did not mention the displacement happening in connection to that law. As I've been telling you for more than a year and a half now, there are cases where investors buy properties where there are locals already living there, and then they give them a letter saying they need to leave because the new owner has something more lucrative planned for that building. Now, this would be heartbreaking whether it is a local investor or an outside investor. It just so happens that when we looked into some of these cases, we found that the people who bought the properties were invited to come to Puerto Rico thanks to the tax break I just told you about. The governor also failed to mention the campaign donations that he gets from the people who benefit from the tax break. As we told you in this video, the governor got this much money in campaign donations in a period of 3 years from Act 22 beneficiaries. He also didn't mention that his daughter-in-law profits from the sale of luxury real estate to outside investors. She's the CEO of a luxury real estate company in Puerto Rico, and she told a local newspaper that the majority of the people buying that kind of real estate are people moving from the U.S. to Puerto Rico to benefit from the tax break. And yesterday, the governor also defended investors buying properties to then list them on Airbnb. But it's important to remember that his son owns a company that manages Airbnbs for people in Puerto Rico.
Like they all know, even though we don't want it to be like this, we don't want it to turn violent. We don't want it to get to this level of, either life or death. But I feel we all know what we're risking here. And it's so much worth like each of our life. This is bigger than any of us. It's Puerto Rico, it's our land. And even if we have to sacrifice our own bodies to protect it, we're willing to do it if the Puerto Rican government doesn't do it.
Welcome back to Bomba Live, the talk show you've been waiting for your entire life. Thank you so much for joining us. That was Puerto Rican journalist Bianca Graulau talking about putting Governor Pedro Pierluisi's comments in context as it relates to calling his own Puerto Rican people xenophobic and racist. Do you know anybody that's more loving and giving, inclusive, and down with everybody than Puerto Ricans? Give me a break. And you also heard from a local activist, Wilmar Vasquez, kind of her counterpoint to this issue. So definitely something we have to continue to monitor. Governor's races and Puerto Rican elections next year are going to be very, very interesting. He will have, by all rights, by all our understanding, a very competitive primary there with resident commissioner, General Gonzalez Diego. So that should be something we're going to monitor. Thank you, Bianca and Wilmal. I wanted to make myself vulnerable here on the last segment of this edition of Bomba Live, the talk show you've been waiting for your entire life. And again, I encourage people to download and subscribe, particularly follow us on social media. And please, please, please subscribe to Bomba Live's YouTube channel. And I'm just on my notes here to make sure that I crossed off the things I've already talked about. So I want to share something with y'all. I want to share how much the 76ers mean to me. Philadelphia 76ers, for folks that don't follow it, are an NBA team, one of the historic teams. And, basically, I want to share something with y'all. When I was growing up in North Philadelphia, 7, 8, 81, 82, we're going back a little bit. My brothers were little kids. They were still like babies, like 3 or 4. So, I played with them, but, I was the oldest. And, I didn't go outside and play. You know what I'm saying? Like, I grew up in the hood. We grew up on a busy street. I didn't have neighbors like that. Like, I didn't ride bikes. I didn't do that. That wasn't my reality. I wasn't like in the street. I was little. My reality was my life from like 7 to 11, 12 was the Philadelphia Phillies and the Philadelphia 76ers. It was my life. I followed them I had baseball cards, I had basketball cards. I read about it's how I learned to read. I'd read about them in the Philadelphia Daily News. I'm serious. I learned to read because of the Phillies and the Sixers. I got into football a little later when Buddy Ryan got there in 85. And, when I was a little kid, I wasn't into comic books. I wasn't even really into cartoons. I'm being honest with you. My hero was this man, Dr. J. Julius Erving. Was not only one of the greatest players, kind of a precursor to Michael Jordan, the high flyer, the most exciting player. You want to argue Iverson, Kobe, Dominique. There's a couple guys, I guess, but one of the most exciting, not only one of the greatest players of all time, was exciting to watch. Just a maestro in the air. And there's nobody cooler to this day than Dr. J. Suave, the afro, the gait, the flavor. We'd run into him at red lights. He's my superhero to this day. Not into Marvel. Sorry. It's, that doesn't do it for me. Dr. J's what did it for me. And their success was such a big part of my life when I'm a kid. That's what I cared about. I cared about the Phillies and Sixers playing well. And so I must say that this series that the Sixers are going through now with the Boston Celtics really triggers me. Because when I was a kid, the Boston Celtics were like my Lex Luthor, my enemy, my Theranos. What do you call him? Theranos. That was my enemy. My mortal enemy in life were the Boston Celtics. Because the Boston Celtics would deny my Philadelphia 76ers again and again and again and again, with a couple exceptions, a chance to go to a championship. Before I was born, the Will Chamberlain, Bill Russell days, and then going into my early childhood with this nonsense, with Dr. J and Larry Bird. This sums up what this was the angst of my childhood, was when these two titans of basketball, Larry Bird, were such great players. Talk about Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic and combined. Just a fantastic player, this guy. But they were the bane of my existence. And there was racial components to that, Philly-Boston stuff. And Boston always seemed to get all the calls. It triggers me now. So I must say that when the Sixers were losing game 3 the other day, I got triggered in a way from a mental health perspective that hadn't been triggered in years. Even during COVID, when I got Guillain-Barré, it really hurt me. I really had to have a moment. I had to stop watching it. I had to go to the basement and start working on my podcast because it really spoke to like the hopes and the aspirations and the disappointments of my childhood, watching the Celtics, my arch enemy, my nemesis, beating my Sixers again. What a great play. We have a great team. We have a big center. It's like history repeating itself again and again. So, it would mean so much to me to win today. And if you're watching this, hopefully you're watching it today, or, most likely you're going to know the result of the game. Game 6, we're up 3-2. Last game we played was the best Sixer game I've seen in since the Iverson days. And, you know, I shouldn't care this much about it. I really shouldn't. I'm a grown ass man. I got life and mortgage and things to do and dreams, you know, but it does. And it really, it speaks to my childhood and just those memories and how much Philadelphia means to me and how much my family means to me and how much the Sixers mean to me. And I don't think I really realized how much I was so emotionally invested in this team until the other day. I'm emotional thinking about it because this is so seared in my memory. And I was so mad when Larry Bird touched my hero, Dr. J. So let's root for my Sixers. They're good guys. Embiid's a really good brother. You know, I don't know if people saw the scene with his child and you know, having his son Arthur, who's named after his brother that tragically passed away a few years ago. When he received the MVP award. You know, Harden's a weird guy, but he's been a good Sixer. Maxey's just a wonderful young man, and obviously my son Max has a nice connection with the name and the nickname. So, you know, let's just hope the Sixers move on and beat our arch nemesis. And you know what? At that point, anything's possible. You only have, you know, we'd be the favorite in the next round, and then after that, we'll see. So thank you all so much for joining the Bomba Live, the talk show you've been waiting for your whole life. You know, what I want to do is actually end this edition of the show. You know, I did not get a chance to you know, get into the shameful, I mean, just the absolute shameful Trump town hall that CNN hosted last night. And so I wanted to give people an opportunity to hear some analysis on it. I mean, it was just absolutely ridiculous. And this is why CNN, you know, it's so interesting. CNN is trying to be like Fox, not so much in ideology, but in lack of seriousness and like try to be more entertaining. And that's what's killing them. You know, I mean, Bernard Shaw, I'm sure is somewhere rolling in his grave because CNN really had such a incredible importance in our society as a news organization, and they've just let themselves, you know, just you know, go to the gutter with Trump. So we want to hear from acclaimed progressive media analyst Mehdi Hasan. His analysis, I think, will sum this up. You're also going to hear you're going to watch and listen to some highlights from my last episode with Joel Berrocal from the National Puerto Rico Chamber of Commerce talking about the Bad Bunny's incredible performance on WWE Backlash this weekend and what, not just for wrestling fans, but what Bad Bunny's projects like his involvement in WWE and the other things he's doing is positively impacting the Puerto Rican economy on the island, bringing the WWE to the island for the first time in 19 years, but also how Puerto Ricans, this speaks to the larger question about how Puerto Ricans are now the power of impact in the larger mainstream Latino culture and the mainstream culture that Puerto Ricans are having largely, not all, but largely through the leadership of Benito Bad Bunny. So watch Mendy's analysis, watch some clips from the previous episode talking about Bad Bunny, and enjoy the rest of your week and enjoy Mother's Day. Bomba Live, the talk show you've been waiting for your entire life.
The CNN town hall tonight was a disaster for anyone not named Donald John Trump. It was a disaster for CNN. It was a disaster for American journalism more broadly. And it was a disaster for anyone who cares about the future of our democracy and, you know, truth. The format was ridiculous. A town hall full of Trump supporters who cheered on and applauded their hero as he spoke on stage. 7 of the 9 audience questions tonight came from people who supported Trump's 2020 re-election bid. And as for host Caitlin Collins's questions, they just didn't land, and there weren't enough follow-ups. When Trump falsely claimed that he had never said the Constitution should be terminated, Collins didn't correct him. When he falsely claimed that Democrats execute babies, Collins didn't correct him. When he falsely claimed that he had finished building his border wall, Collins tried to correct him, but he just talked all over her. And when Trump made a racist remark about Chinatown, Collins said nothing whatsoever, nor did she defend herself when he called her a nasty person. Perhaps the most revealing and depressing moment of the night is when Collins again and again tried to interrupt Donald Trump's nonstop lying about a rigged 2020 election.
And then we had a rigged election. I'm sorry to say it.
The election was not rigged, Mr. President. You can't keep saying that all night long.
Actually, he could. He did. And CNN helped him do it.
Bad Bunny's really, you know, the stuff, the influence he brings doesn't matter what he can. It could be a concert, it could be a wrestling show, it can be an art show, man. He could, whatever he wants to put his name on, man, it's gonna be impactful. So we're just, I think we're just kind of at the beginning of it, and it's just gonna continue to build. So we're excited to be a part of that. And so
you literally sat me down and said, let's be honest about it. How much música urbana, el movimiento reggaeton has done for our community? How many kids it's kept off the street? How many mouths are getting fed? How many businesses have grown? How is it expanding the Puerto Rican influence in every way, bro? I mean, people in all over Latin America, all over the world use Puerto Rican slang. You know what I'm saying? Like,